This is the LG C2, and this is the LG C1. Vinny and I are going to have a little competition. We're going to race and see who can be the first to fire up Moon Knight from the Disney Plus app on these OLED TVs. 3, 2, 1, go! Right, yeah, in your face, man, in your face. Come on. As you can see, the WebOS interface on the C2 is quicker and more responsive than on the C1, and a lot of it is down to the new chipset implemented on the C2. If we delve into the service menu, you can see that the LG C2 is using a new O32 chipset, whereas the C1 is using an older O20N SoC. As it turned out, the O32 chipset brought about a number of upgrades in picture processing too. For starters, the C2 didn't require as much dithering near black as the C1 to maintain decent gradation, resulting in cleaner above black presentation without significant chrominance overshoot or flashing artifacts. Not only on this moving quantization test pattern developed by Stacy Spears of Spears and Mansell fame, but also in bit-stuffed broadcast material, such as this heavily compressed scene from the final season of Game of Thrones. Because of this, perhaps LG didn't see the need to crush some shadow detail to keep chrominance overshoot at bay on the C2. As you can see from this side-by-side comparison with both LG OLEDs set to filmmaker mode without further adjustments, the LG C1 crushed more shadow detail out of the box, whereas the C2 came closer to matching the reference monitor. Of course, both televisions could be calibrated to level the playing field, but even then, near black gamma tracking was just slightly better on the C2, contributing to more accurate shadow detailing compared to the C1. The next upgrade brought about by the O22 SoC is upscaling. Because both the LG C1 and C2 we are comparing are of the same screen size of 48 inches, we could clearly see sharper detail retrieval from the C2, ranging from this SMPTE RP133 test card in 576i and this grubby standard definition broadcast from ITV4, to this high-definition broadcast from BBC HD, and finally a pristine 1080p Blu-ray of Skyfall. Despite YouTube's compression, hopefully you can appreciate the detail on Daniel Craig's face coming across that bit sharper and more pronounced on the LG C2. However, in some 1080p Blu-ray scenes containing densely packed detail, we thought the more aggressive upscaling on the LG C2 could appear a touch overprocessed, while the C1 would look a bit more natural. Another improvement delivered by the new O32 chipset is in the area of motion interpolation. Engaging the same level of true motion introduced less interpolation artifacts on the C2 compared to the C1 on our own custom-authored test pattern containing complex movements. There's good news too for C2 owners in PAL regions. LG's True Motion algorithm used to cause some microstutter in 50Hz broadcast programs, particularly with hand gestures and head movements. But such artifacts were significantly less frequent on the C2, although from time to time, you may still see some jerkiness in certain slow panning shots depending on the source material. One major downgrade on the LG C2 compared to the C1 is the removal of 120Hz black frame insertion or BFI. On the C2, the OLED motion setting is only an on-off toggle, while on the C1, the OLED Motion Pro control offers 3 intensities of low, medium, and high to let you achieve the right balance for your viewing habits without incurring excessive flicker and brightness drop. For 60Hz content, engaging OLED motion on the LG C2 appeared slightly less flickery than the seemingly equivalent OLED Motion Pro high setting on the C1, and this is explained by the slow motion footage of both televisions captured at 1000 frames per second. For the sake of completeness, I've also included the slow motion footage at 24 frames per second and also 50 frames per second in this very video. Note that at 120 frames per second, OLED motion on the C2 seemed to have no effect at all, neither improving motion clarity nor lowering brightness, suggesting that black frame insertion or BFI on the LG C2 was truly limited to 60 Hz, which is further reinforced by the introduction of telecinic judder in 24p films once OLED motion was enabled on the C2. Next, let's talk about gradation. A native gradation on the LG C2 was slightly smoother than on the C1, especially at 4K 120Hz. Here, I'm using examples from the character loading screen in Outriders, as well as the blue sky in Microsoft Flight Simulator played through the Xbox Series X. For HDR, peak brightness on our LG 48C2 retail unit measured roughly 30 nits brighter than our 48C1 on a 10% window after calibration to D65 white point. And because of slightly different ABL or automatic brightness limiter algorithm, a handful of window sizes would actually look brighter on the LG C1, although both OLED televisions eventually settle at around the same full-field brightness. In real-world HDR content, we struggle to see any meaningful difference in peak brightness between our 48-inch C1 and C2 OLEDs. Perhaps there will be more difference on 55-inch and larger models with brightness booster technology. We did observe that the C2 retained a tad more specular highlight detail due to slightly higher peak brightness and earlier PQ-EOTF roll-off by default. We also spotted some differences in how APL transitions are handled. On the LG C2, during scene cuts in 24p movies from very high APL to lower APL, and vice versa, the APL change would be delayed by 1 frame, whereas on the C1, the transition was dampened across a few frames. Here, I'm using my color grading software DaVinci Resolve to advance frame by frame, so that the luminance delay difference is easier for you to see. Some viewers will be more sensitive to one approach than to the other, but neither APL transition is ideal, compared to a reference monitor and some other OLED televisions where there's no frame delay at all. Otherwise, the LG C2 lets you select 21:9 and even 32:9 aspect ratios so that you can play PC games in wider aspect ratios without needing to tinker with custom resolution on your PC, whereas the C1 is fixed to 16:9 aspect ratio by edit. I've demonstrated the speedier WebOS navigation on the C2 in the intro of this video, but in addition, you can also disable the pop-up settings tips to reduce clutter and speed things up even more, while you can't do that on the C1. The C2 also features picture-in-picture and picture-in-picture multi-view capabilities, but not many input sources are supported yet at the time I filmed this video in April 2022. So, should you buy the LG C1 or the LG C2? I'm going to try and make it as easy as possible for you to decide. This video is sponsored by Box, the online technology store. Visit box.co.uk for the best deals on TVs, soundbars, and all your other technology needs. If you require 120Hz black frame insertion or BFI, which I must stress only appeals to some gamers who prioritize motion clarity above all else, then you have no choice. You will have to buy the C1, because the C2 doesn't support 120Hz BFI at all. Otherwise, the C2 is better than the C1 in many aspects: near black handling, upscaling, gradation, motion interpolation, WebOS speed, as well as ultra-wide aspect ratio and multi-view capabilities. Now, this doesn't mean that you should rush out and buy the LG C2 right now, because a television is usually at its most expensive when launched. If you absolutely need to buy a television today, the outgoing LG C1 is undoubtedly going to provide better value for money. However, if you can afford to wait, I've done another video explaining when is the best time of the year to buy a television at its lowest price, so go watch that video by clicking here.